Imagine finding yourself in the heart of a frozen forest, miles away from civilization, where every shadow hides a mystery and every sound makes your heart race. What would you do if you heard a scream in the dead of night? Welcome to today's chilling story, one that will have you questioning what truly lurks in the dark. If you've ever had an unexplainable encounter or just love a good scare, share your thoughts in the comments below. Type, "I'm ready for chills," if you're brave enough to face this tale to the end. Last winter, my friend Colin and I planned what we thought would be the perfect getaway. A week in a secluded cabin deep in the forests of Alaska. It felt like the ideal escape from the dull rhythm of our small-town lives. Colin had found the cabin online, advertised as a cozy retreat with stunning views and a wood-burning stove to keep us warm. The thought of peaceful nights by the fire and snow-covered trees all around was irresistible. We packed our bags, loaded up my truck, and set out in the early afternoon. The drive started out easy, but as we got closer, the road narrowed into a winding trail cutting through endless trees. By the time we arrived, the sun was already sinking below the horizon, casting eerie shadows over the snowy landscape. The cabin was small but inviting. It had a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and an old fireplace that had clearly seen better days. Surrounding it was a wall of towering trees and an almost oppressive silence. After unpacking, we decided to take a short walk before night fell completely. The forest was unnervingly quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're being watched. As we walked, our boots crunched against the fresh snow, and the only other sound was the faint whistle of the wind. Then we heard it. A scream. At first, it was distant, carried faintly by the wind. Colin and I froze, exchanging uneasy glances. Then it came again, louder and unmistakably human. It wasn't just a scream, it was a cry of pure desperation, the kind that twists your stomach into knots. "We have to check it out," Colin said, his voice resolute. He'd always been braver than me, or maybe just more reckless. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend we hadn't heard anything. But what if someone was in real danger? Reluctantly, I followed him as we trudged through the snow, the screams growing louder with every step. Soon we saw a faint light through the trees. It led us to another cabin, older and far more decrepit than ours. Its grimy windows barely held back the flickering glow of what looked like a lantern or a fire inside. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, muffled noise, like someone crying or struggling to breathe. Colin motioned for me to stay back as he crept toward the cabin and peered through a frost-covered window. He wiped away a patch to see inside. When he turned back to me, his face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "There's a guy tied to a chair," he whispered, "and another man. He's wearing a mask. He has a knife." My blood ran cold. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me. Before I could fully process what Colin had said, a voice rang out behind us, low and sharp. "What are you doing?" We spun around to see a man standing just a few feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a heavy coat with his face hidden beneath a hood. Though I couldn't see his eyes, I could feel them piercing through me. Colin grabbed my arm and we bolted without a second thought. The man shouted something, but we didn't stop to listen. The forest blurred around us as we ran, our breaths coming in ragged gasps and the snow crunching loudly beneath our boots. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, relentless and unyielding. My lungs burned and my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. Still, we didn't dare look back. When we reached our cabin, we slammed the door shut and locked it with trembling hands. For a moment, we just stood there, panting and staring at each other in stunned silence. Then we turned off all the lights and peered cautiously out the window. The forest outside was still, the only sound the wind whistling through the trees. Colin fumbled for his phone and called the authorities. It felt like an eternity before we saw the flashing red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. 2 officers stepped out, their breath visible in the icy air. We hurried outside to meet them and recounted everything. The screams, the masked man, the chase. They seemed skeptical but agreed to investigate. We led them back to the rundown cabin, our flashlights slicing through the shadows. But when we arrived, the place was empty. The light was gone, the screams had stopped, and there was no sign of anyone. The door creaked on its hinges, and inside we found nothing but an old, dusty room and a broken chair in the corner. The officers assured us they'd continue searching and told us to stay in our cabin for the night. Needless to say, we didn't sleep at all. Every sound outside made my heart jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. 2 days later, the authorities called with an update. They had found the men, both the masked man and the one who'd been tied up. They didn't provide many details, only that the situation had been resolved. When I pressed for more information, the officer on the phone hesitated before saying, "It's better if you don't know." We left the cabin that same day, cutting our trip short. What had once felt like a peaceful retreat now felt sinister and wrong, as if the forest itself was hiding dark secrets we were never meant to uncover. Even now, back at home, I can't escape the memory of that night. The screams, the masked man, the chase. It's all burned into my mind. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I hear that voice again, low and cold, asking, "What are you doing?" Before we dive into the next story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest chilling tales. We'd love your support, so share this story with friends and family who love a good scare. And remember, type "I'm ready for chills" in the comments if you're excited for more. Thank you for watching and stay safe out there. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night only to realize you weren't alone? Stick around because what I'm about to share will make you double-check your locks tonight. It was January 2019, and I lived in a quiet neighborhood in California. That winter was unusually harsh, with news channels warning of an extremely rare and heavy snowstorm. Snow wasn't something we usually saw here. It felt surreal, almost out of place. That night, everything outside was blanketed in white, as if the world had been painted with a thick layer of snow. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and I woke up around 3 a.m., groggy and needing to use the bathroom. The silence in the house felt oppressive, as if the snow outside had muffled even the faintest noise. As I swung my legs off the bed, I glanced at the window to see how much snow had fallen. Pulling back the curtain, I was mesmerized by the untouched expanse of snow. It was deep, smooth, and glowed faintly under the streetlights, a perfect, magical stillness. After using the bathroom, I decided to head downstairs for a glass of water. The cold tiles under my feet sent shivers up my spine, but I ignored it. The kitchen was eerily quiet as I turned on the light and grabbed a glass from the cabinet. As I stood there, drinking my water, I heard a soft click from the front door. My first thought was that it was just the wind knocking something against it. After all, the storm was fierce. Shrugging it off, I switched off the light and went back upstairs. When I got back to my room, curiosity drew me to the window again. But this time, something was different. The once pristine snow had been disturbed. There were footprints, fresh ones. They started at the edge of our driveway and led toward the neighbor's backyard. I froze, staring at the tracks. It couldn't have been more than 4 minutes since I last looked outside. Who could have walked there so quickly without me hearing a sound? The tracks didn't loop back. They disappeared behind the neighbor's house, vanishing into thin air. Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, I told myself it must have been someone passing through. A shortcut, maybe. But deep down, I knew it didn't make sense. I barely slept that night, my eyes glued to the window, waiting for any sign of movement. The next morning, I found my parents in the living room, visibly upset. My mom sat clutching her hands tightly, and my dad was pacing. "What's wrong?" I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My dad stopped and looked at me, his expression grim. "Your mom's gold jewelry set is gone," he said. The jewelry wasn't just expensive, it was sentimental. A gift from my dad to my mom on their anniversary. She rarely wore it, keeping it safe in a small wooden box in their bedroom. I immediately thought about the footprints. My heart raced as I told them what I'd seen, tracks in the snow leading from our house to the neighbor's backyard. My dad's face hardened as he said, "We need to check the security cameras." We rushed to the monitor connected to the cameras. My dad rewound the footage to around 3 a.m., the time I'd gone downstairs. At first, everything seemed normal. The front door camera showed only falling snow, and the backyard camera was no different. But when he switched to the kitchen camera, we all froze. The footage showed me entering the kitchen, turning on the light and pouring water. But there, in the corner of the screen, near the doorway leading to the dining room, was a shadowy figure. A man. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes, standing perfectly still, partially hidden by the door frame. His head was slightly tilted, and he was watching me the entire time I was in the kitchen. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't noticed him at all. My mom gasped, covering her mouth, and my dad cursed under his breath. We rewound the footage again and again, trying to see his face, but the camera quality wasn't good enough to make out any details. The police were called immediately. When they arrived, they reviewed the footage and searched for evidence. But the snowstorm had covered the tracks, and the blurry video offered no leads. The police could only advise us to secure the house better. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about that man. How long had he been inside the house? Had he been watching me before I went downstairs? And the question that haunted me the most, what would have happened if I'd noticed him? Have you ever experienced something that made your blood run cold? Share your story in the comments below, and let's see who has the creepiest tale. Have you ever been home alone and felt like something just wasn't right? That creeping sensation in the back of your mind, like someone's watching. Well, this story will make you think twice about locking your doors. Stick around and don't forget to comment your thoughts below. It was a bitterly cold December evening in Minnesota, and the world outside my window lay buried under a thick blanket of snow, nearly a foot deep. The air felt still, the kind of quiet that only snow can bring, muffling every sound and turning the neighborhood into a frozen, silent canvas. My parents were out for the evening at a local bar, and my brother was spending the night at a friend's house. I had the place to myself, which didn't bother me in the slightest. I'd always loved the solitude. Wrapped in a blanket on the couch, I was absorbed in a show on TV. The soft glow of the screen lit up the room, contrasting with the shadows that filled the rest of the house. The steady ticking of the wall clock was the only other sound accompanying me. I had just crumpled up an empty bag of chips when I heard it. A faint knock. It came from the basement. At first, I brushed it off as the old pipes groaning in the cold. Our house was ancient, and it had a history of odd noises, especially in winter. But this sound was different. It was deliberate, gentle, yet persistent. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, transforming it into a makeshift cape, and headed for the basement door. My sock-covered feet felt icy against the hardwood floor, and the air grew heavier as I approached. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally opening it. The light switch clicked, and the bulb flickered momentarily before settling into a steady, yellowish glow. Long shadows stretched down the walls as I peered into the basement. The stairs creaked beneath me as I descended. The faint scent of dust and old cardboard greeted me, but everything seemed normal. Boxes were stacked neatly in corners, an old desk stood covered in papers, and a few plastic bins sat near the far wall. Nothing appeared out of place. I scanned the small basement windows for any sign of movement or a draft that could have caused the sound, but found nothing. With a shrug, I chalked it up to my imagination or perhaps snow shifting against the house. I climbed back upstairs, shut the basement door, and resumed my spot on the couch. Just as I began to relax, the peace shattered. A loud crash came from the basement, followed by the distinct sound of a door slamming open. My heart pounded as I shot upright, staring at the basement door. This was no ordinary noise. It was sharp, unmistakable. Summoning what courage I could muster, I approached the basement door again. "Ryan," I called, my voice trembling. Maybe my brother had come home early and decided to prank me. Silence answered back. I called out again, louder this time, but the only response was the faint buzz of the basement light. My stomach twisted in knots as I gripped the doorknob and descended the stairs once more. The air felt colder this time, and the light flickered ominously. When I reached the bottom, my breath hitched. The desk drawers were yanked open, papers scattered across the floor. The previously neat boxes had been toppled, their contents spilling everywhere. The plastic bins lay overturned, their lids tossed aside. But the most chilling sight was the back door. It stood wide open, allowing freezing air to pour in. Snow had blown inside, forming a thin, powdery layer on the floor. Leading out into the snowy night were fresh footprints, stark and deliberate. For a moment, I couldn't move. Someone had been in my house. Someone had ransacked the basement while I was just upstairs, oblivious. A chill crept over me that had nothing to do with the cold air. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and fumbled with my phone to call my parents. My mom picked up, her voice calm but edged with concern as I stumbled through my explanation. "Stay put," she said. "We're coming home now." Minutes later, my parents arrived. My dad grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to follow the footprints while my mom stayed with me, trying to keep me calm. I listened as his boots crunched through the snow, the sound fading as he ventured farther into the yard. When he returned, he shook his head. "The tracks end at the road. They must have gotten into a car." The police arrived shortly after. They inspected the basement, asking questions and searching for signs of forced entry. Oddly enough, there were none. The door hadn't been broken. It had simply been unlocked. My dad insisted he had locked it earlier, but maybe it hadn't latched properly. The officer suggested it might have been a random burglary, someone targeting our house because it looked empty. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The way everything had been rifled through, almost methodically, made it feel personal, like whoever it was had been searching for something specific. To this day, I still don't know what they were looking for, or if they found it. Have you ever experienced something creepy while home alone? Share your story below. I'd love to hear it. Please subscribe for more horror stories. Thanks for watching.